Welcome. Welcome to LTUE 2021 at the Apocalypse. Let's begin this panel just with everyone introducing themselves. My name's John Lundwall. I live in Utah County. I have a doctorate in comparative myth and religious studies. I'm project leader on an archaeoastronomy project investigating Fremont culture in ancient Utah. I'm a writer, lecturer. That's me. I have a lot of interest in religion. Ben, take it over. Introduce yourself.
I am a Dandini storyteller and voice actor. I do a lot of storytelling in mythology and folklore, especially focusing on the peoples of the Pacific Northwest. And yeah, more particularly for this panel, I've gone through my own faith crisis, so I've got that behind me as well.
Are you a writer, Ben?
I am a writer as well, but not professionally.
All right. Michaelbrent, introduce yourself to us.
All right. My name is Michaelbrent Collings. I'm an international bestseller. I've written 40, 50 books. I honestly don't know. But I'm one of the top indie genre writers in the United States and have written some movies and been up for a Bram Stoker Award and a Whitney and a bunch of things. So I write stuff, and I'm a person, I enjoy telling people, I'm a horror writer, and they're like, and then I go, and I'm a Sunday school teacher. Now you don't know where I'm coming from. So incorporating faith and questions like that is very important in a lot of my writing.
Do you incorporate horror into Sunday school?
I do. Well, you can't talk about Jesus getting crucified. I mean, people are like, that's horrifying.
Very awesome. Sarah.
All right. So
what's the word?
I'm Sarah Seeley. I am a Paleolithic archaeologist. I'm really excited because I got my master's degree before the pandemic happened from University College of London.
Nice.
With distinction, which was just since we're all pumping ourselves up here. And I also write horror. I write science fiction and fantasy as well. I mostly write novelettes and short stories, and I publish at a slower rate, but I mostly publish with small presses and small magazines and or semi-professional magazines, I should say, and self-published.
Hello?
Her qualifications destroyed the internet.
Of faith, who, as an archaeologist, I spent time around Bull. Who? Oh, I couldn't quite hear everyone.
You froze up.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh no, I froze up. Oh dear. Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes. Can you tell everyone what a Paleolithic archaeologist is?
Sure. So I deal with human origins related archaeology and with early Homo sapiens or anatomically modern human prehistory. So yeah, looking at human evolution types of topics as it relates to the archaeological record. And I also have some paleoanthropology, anatomy, evolution of human anatomy, and things like that. So that's my particular background as an archaeologist.
Cool.
So and my being on this panel, so I'm a person of faith who, as an archaeologist, I'm around people who are atheists, who are not don't ascribe to a faith, or they might be agnostic. And it's important for me to understand how to find common ground with, find, because we all have common human experiences that that challenge our worldviews, and it's important for us to understand each other. And I do enjoy exploring faith-based questions and things that that are paradigm shifts and things like that in people's lives that shake up your worldview and cause you to ask really deep questions about what you believe. So I think those are really interesting.
Thank you, Sarah. Jared, give us a brief introduction and we'll get going.
Okay, well, I'm a team librarian for the Salt Lake County.
Jared's this guy here, by the way. He's holding really still.
Yep, chameleon. But yes, I work there, a lot of stuff with that. I write sci-fi, fantasy, and a little bit of steampunk. And while I don't generally have it at the forefront, all my books deal with religion one way or another, with the the sci-fi series where the protagonist is from a world that outlawed all religion, so she's never even heard the word faith before, and then gets out into the wider galaxy and is exploring that a little bit, to the steampunk where the protagonist is a organic robot and doesn't even know if she has a soul or not. My latest is half Sailor Moon, half Dutch mythology and history, and the main characters are basically the teenage priestesses who their order is all that was left when they were conquered. So it's been 1,000 years of their religion being outlawed, and so they've lost more than they remember. And the protagonists, they all are learning things about the religion they never knew, completely changing their worldview as a result.
Very interesting. All right. I thought so. This panel, we're just going to make it conversational. We're going to leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A so that people can write in questions. I thought I would just begin with a brief introduction. The premise of this panel is every person has fundamental beliefs about the world. What happens when those beliefs are challenged? Now, I'm going to approach this not so much as private therapy, but as writers and artists dealing with narratives and stories and world building. How do we tackle the subject? So, brief introduction. I'm not going to ask everyone's definition of religion. There are theories and theories of religion. No one's going to agree on it. But the panel has a very good catchphrase there. Every person has fundamental beliefs about the world. This is a person's cosmovision, how they see how the world is made up, and specifically what relationships make up the world and where do I fit in that. And once every conscious being develops that cosmovision, at the top of that cosmovision is a supreme good that kind of orders it. And for some people, that's God or the gods, but it doesn't have to be, right? And, for science fiction or fantasy narratives, it could be an intergalactic bureaucracy or a mineral or spice on the planet Dune. And there's not one supreme good, there's competing supreme goods. But the point is, once you develop that in your culture, there are autonomous things that happen around a belief in a metaphysical supreme good. That is a sense of ethics and values develop around that supreme good as we try to live up to the supreme good. Moral prescriptions develop. These are the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots, which allow one access or deny one access to the supreme good. A hierarchy develops to oversee the moral prescriptions, and then there are rituals and social acts which people do to reinforce the supreme good. All that happens in a cosmovision, or what this panel is calling a religion. So here's my question to the panelists. Question one. As writers and artists, and with me in my criminal past, we talked about that earlier, telling stories, what might be some key events that would fundamentally change one's idea of what a supreme, their cosmic structure, how they think the universe is made, how they think the world is formed? What would be an event or trigger that would challenge someone to rewrite their entire belief system? And I would like, if you could, to give an example out of maybe a science fiction example, a fantasy example, personal example from one of your stories or narratives, steampunk, different genres, or just a present day example. All right, that's my question. I would like to, Ben, do you want to enter the foray?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a big question. But, I think the start of it is really just encountering something that counters the way you believe the world works. And that's where it comes from a lot. Whether it's learning about somebody else's cosmovision, as you talked about it, or encountering a really difficult situation where you believe that a certain outcome is supposed to happen and something else happens entirely. Those sorts of things challenge your faith, and when it's a sufficiently big one, a faith crisis ensues.
And someone on the panel, how about Michaelbrent? You've written 3,822 novels by last
23.
count. Oh, 23. Sorry, one just published. Give us an example in one of your narratives that Ben is right. When something sufficiently big comes in and just mucks things up, that has to be a pretty big thing.
Yeah. And well, it's nice because when you're talking about fiction, that happens almost always. That's the inciting incident, is the kind of fiction word for it. And what it amounts to is, we think of it a lot of times less as, it's challenging my worldview than a broadening. The hero or the heroine suddenly becomes aware that there's a world beyond what they thought. An easy example is Luke Skywalker. Like, his big thing is moisture converters and whining about going into town with his buddies. And all of a sudden he finds out there's the Force. There's this universal thing that binds us, and you're caught up in it. In one of my stories, in the Sword Chronicles, one of the ways I deal with faith is a recognition that it's important to some people, and it's not so important to others. And so in the Sword Chronicles, there is a particular group that are priests, and they have been living for 1,000 years according to these laws and credos, and they've got scripture, and they discover that their holiest books that they thought were given by revelation to this emperor were actually written out of other books. It's a fantasy series that evolves into science fiction, and they discover that the prophecies of the emperor are just pulled out of passages of these old books called the Bible and the Quran and the Book of Mormon and the writings of Confucius, and they have to deal with the fact that suddenly something they thought was direct from God to a prophet to them had a lot of little byways before getting there. And does that make it false? Or does that just make it an alternate narrative to their truth? And things like that, it's that they challenge the worldview, but they're not, as soon as you come in and just directly contradict it, that becomes very hard to follow. That's the antagonist. That's the thing that represents everything the hero hates. And so if you want to talk about the hero's journey, it has to be something that broadens rather than attempts to destroy. And ultimately, it might actually end up destroying their worldview, but it's not presented as a destruction. It's presented as new information that will take them to a greater universe.
And very good. A couple of points. Maybe I can get Sarah and Anjewierden on this question. One, there is this narrative that people believe in, and if that gets sufficiently challenged by something either external or internal, the point is there's an individual religious cosmovision and there's a collective religious cosmovision. And generally in the collective religious cosmovision, there is a hierarchy that wants to preserve the narrative no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So in your stories or narratives, Um, tell us about how do you negotiate the individual faith crisis versus the collective faith crisis? How can you play with that in your world building? Thoughts?
Well, I kind of took a different approach with that because with my most recent one, because there the individual and the collective conflicts are within the same person. Because you have this high priestess of the goddess who's believed all her life that her people are the chosen people and that they'll be preserved and eventually win their freedom from this empire of another race that conquered them. And then she gets one of that other race dumped on her doorstep, she thinks by the goddess, and has to contend with the fact that yeah, she was kind of racist and maybe they're not all bad. And at the same time, she's learning that, well, yes, maybe her people are the chosen people, but so are the other race. That they're all the children of the goddess, not just her small group. And so it's very much an internal conflict because, again, the religion was, in this case, was almost entirely destroyed after 1,000 years of occupation. So she's it. She is the hierarchy. And yet she's warring with herself while learning this new information.
Oh, that's interesting. That makes me want to ask the question, what does a faith crisis look like in an individual as opposed to a society, as opposed to a bureaucracy, as opposed to an intergalactic planetary alliance? I mean, this could take all sorts of different in a magic system. What if your magic system is the faith crisis? There's something fundamental. Any explorations on that thought?
Yeah, I think that brings up the interesting thought of, like, in a belief system, no matter how tight that belief system is, how controlled it is, everybody within that is individuals. And so an individual faith crisis looks like one thing, but a big hierarchical, big group faith crisis is going to look like lots of little things that are all happening in different ways. Some of them will look a lot like each other and some of them won't. And I think it's a really fun way to explore just the different ways that people react with that, and the way that your characters may react themselves.
Can I pop in and say something?
You bet, Michaelbrent.
Oh, I really like that. I think when, in fiction, especially in genre work, because genre work tends to expand the importance. It's like, literary fiction, we're talking about chamomile tea and sort of reflecting on whether we're going to commit adultery while a dewdrop trickles down. And that's the whole book. And nothing wrong with that. It's just that's sort of very focused on these small things in the lyricism. And you get into genre work, John's laughing. So he either agrees or he thinks I'm a moron.
No.
That was a very detailed answer.
Yeah, no, it's just very detailed. Exactly.
Which book is that in that you wrote,
I've seen 5 books like that out of college professors.
See, there's different kinds, but in genre fiction, we tend to, we're saying this is an important message, and it broadens out so much. And so it's interesting when you take both of those different, like, micro and macro conflicts. The micro conflict tends to show itself by saying, I have to fight and destroy this status quo. And the status quo can be the evil galactic empire, or it can be the serial killer, whose own faith consists of murder everybody. And regardless, the individual that we're focusing on, they're trying to destroy whatever that is. Whereas if you're talking about, like Ben was talking about, a bigger sort of a macro situation, it always shows itself in chaos. And the ultimate example of that is civil war, where the self the United States, for example, had this crisis of faith. What do we believe? And it pulled itself apart. And it allowed for these great stories of individual faith when you're talking about brother against brother and the decisions of how to fight and why to fight. And then you look at this broad scale, and as a human, it's like I'm pushing. When it's a community, it's just this unraveling and destruction, and it's horrifying. But from a fiction perspective, it's just a gold mine, and it's so interesting to plumb.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So what I was going to say was, with small, when you have small groups that have had a particular set of traditions, and some of those aspects might be religious, and some aspects might not necessarily be religious, but you'll have small groups that they're trying not to be absorbed by another group or obliterated by another group. And so they might use certain narratives, certain myths, certain other kinds of beliefs to bolster a sense of identity, bolster a sense of pride in sense of worth in yourself, and to push back against getting sort of absorbed into other aspects of society or other societies that might be dangerous or something like that. So they do it to try and keep themselves apart as kind of a self-preservation thing. And an example from science fiction, so it was interesting. I've started watching this YouTube channel called Cinema Therapy. And it's these two guys who talk about films and talk about psychological aspects of the films. It's kind of fun. But they talked about the first Wonder Woman movie and how Wonder Woman, when she's a little girl, she has a certain narrative that she's given about her group of kind of superwoman people, the Amazons, and their relationship with the world and their relationship with the gods as well, and how all those things work together. And so she has this narrative that's good in a lot of ways. And so she ends up in a situation later on where she has to leave her little island where she's been sheltered in a lot of ways. She's not under the same kinds of physical threats just because she's a super person, but she has a lot of ignorance that's kind of adorable about people. She believes that people are basically good, and that when people do bad things, it's because there's this god of mischief who has gotten power, or the god of war has gotten power, and he's kind of taken over people, and he's basically possessing them to go to war with each other and cause destruction, and he's just doing this for his own amusement. And then towards the end of the story, what you see is she's destroyed someone who she thought was connected to this evil god, and thinks that, okay, his power has dispersed, all these people who are preparing for war during World War II stuff, they're going to go, they've been released, they're going to go back to being the naturally good people that they are. And then she realizes that, people are still preparing for war, and they're still going to go fight each other and kill each other and maybe do terrible things to each other. And that is a paradigm shift for her in that moment, where she has to reconcile the fact that she believed one thing about human nature and realize that it's more complex. And then she has, this god that was supposed to be evil, basically talks to her and says, no, look, people just do this themselves. I'm just doing whatever, and you can join me if you want. Like this is just kind of what they do. And then her boyfriend's like, well, people are complex. They're kind of good and bad, and they have to choose. And so that's a paradigm shift for her, where she has to make some choices about, well, what does this mean? Are people bad? Do I just leave them? Do I just abandon them then? Like, how do I wrap my mind around that? So that's an interesting moment.
Very cool.
One conflict that I was just thinking of, it's a little less a faith, but still a worldview, is in the movie version of I, Robot. Will Smith's character gets in this big accident and is saved by a passing robot, but he's just devastated because there was this other, little girl in the same crash, and the robot picked him over her. And, in his mind, it should absolutely have been her, when the robot's thinking, much more logically, where he had a higher chance of surviving. And it's interesting to see he's dealing with that crisis of faith basically through the whole movie, because he's, he can't accept that that was the right choice, and so he externalizes it and hates robots, even though they saved his life, and even though he's now technically sort of part robot himself because he had his arm replaced. And it kind of goes back to the whole idea, humans like to think they're rational. We're not. We're rationalizing. And so we can convince ourselves of the craziest things in order to avoid looking at the truth, or what we think is the truth.
Cognitive dissonance is an awesome fiction tool to screw with things.
Also, it does well in real life.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's too
Yep.
scary.
I was just going to ask. I think maybe Jerry, you just gave the example of give an example of a faith crisis in a non-religious context. So, in a completely secular, technocratic society, what would that look like? And I think Jared just gave one example in iRobot, which is a great example. Are there others?
The Worthing Chronicle by Orson Scott Card is an excellent example of that. Kind of the MacGuffin, or the driving force, is there's this universe where they've discovered cryosleep, but it doesn't, they don't have faster than light travel, but they realize these pilots are living thousands and thousands of years, and your lifespan becomes a determinant of how important you are. And so there are people who will go into cryosleep for 100 years and come out for a week and go back in for 100 years. So they're living millions of years possibly, but not actually experiencing existence is the tragedy. They're like skipping stones, I think is what the book calls them. And the crisis of faith comes when the people in this universe that is essentially ordered by who sleeps the most discover that the administrators of this sleep are not the objective, careful, rational people they've been led to believe. They are being influenced by corrupt people outside. So this has become sort of their religion, a secular religion and belief system, and they've just discovered that their priest figures are utterly corrupt. They're not receiving, information from on high, which in this case would be actual who's of value in this society, who belongs or deserves to sleep. They're being paid by people. They're being pressured by people. And so the entire society crumbles because of this sudden realization that their belief system is flawed at its foundation.
You see, it's the same in every universe. Well, so look, these are excellent examples of sort of, how these faith challenges can affect societies. I really like the iRobot example. Give an example, narrative, maybe personally, but of the centered individual psychological consequence of a radical faith change. What does that look like? Are there examples in narrative that you like that show protagonists improving from that situation or devolving from that situation? Does it always have to be a better ending? But does the protagonist ever just fall to pieces and stay there?
So the two that really come to my mind, it kind of I've got one of each that. You were talking Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. This is an example, but Ender's belief throughout the whole thing that it was a computer simulation, and he was fighting against Mazer Rackham, and all of a sudden he finds out that he's actually destroyed this entire civilization. It destroys him, that last little bit, and then even the following books kind of deal with the fallout from that as he deals with the guilt of going along with what he believed what was happening, but not recognizing it. And then on the other side, Brandon Sanderson, I will always love this portrayal of a faith crisis, Sazed in the Mistborn trilogy. It's really great, and it shows a lot of, Michaelbrent, you were talking earlier about the chaos of a macro, but that chaos is in an individual going through a faith crisis. You just can't see it a lot, but Brandon Sanderson does a great job showing that Sazed is just like, he's slowly losing it as he moves one religion after another to the no-go pile.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like this is a little bit of a shallower example, but taking from the inspiration for the name for this symposium, Life, the Universe, and Everything, you have different kinds of stories where people, they're kind of living their normal lives, and then it gets upended when they realize that there's this whole other thing going on, whether it's like underground vampires, are existing in society, or with Life, the Universe, and Everything, like the whole Earth is an alien experiment run by mice. And the Earth is about to be destroyed, and so somebody is taking him off of Earth before it gets destroyed, and he's like, wait, what? I'm trying to save my house from getting demolished, and like going about doing normal things. And I mean that's a little bit of an absurd example, but I feel like those can kind of tap into some of those ideas in some ways, where it's like there's something else going on where you're living your normal life, and then something shakes it up, and you see a part of the world that you didn't see before that is connected to you and your existence and the way you go about doing things, and you have to adapt to that reality and incorporate that into your reality where it wasn't a part of your reality before.
And what is a good way to make that adaptation? How do you adapt?
I think in fiction, at least, one of the best ways to create a kind of a verisimilitude for dealing with this is the character can't just receive counter information and say, oh, now I get it.
Right.
What they're going to do to make it powerful is they're going to deny it and fall into inaction. So again, Star Wars I like as examples because it's sort of a broadly done story that allows you to look at the structure of it. So Luke, he is like, I hate this place. I'm going to go and become a pilot. And then he meets Kenobi, and he goes, you should leave this place and be a pilot. But not because the farm sucks, which is your reason, but the Force. And Luke's just been offered exactly what he wants, but in a way that challenges his worldview. And he's like, but I can't leave because the farm, and that's a really good example. Or another great one where the protagonist goes the opposite direction is The Godfather. The main character is trying to be this moral person. I mean, he's a freaking war hero, and he's trying to stay connected to a family that he knows is evil. And he has this continued sort of inaction for the first bit of the movie until finally he walks in and says, I will kill this person. And from there is a descent into the reality that he's discovered, which is you can't maintain this family connection and also be a good person. He has to either excise that evil completely or become part of it. And counter to Luke, who's like, well, I guess I'll go destroy the Death Star. In The Godfather, the protagonist says, well, I guess I'll be the Emperor. And so you can do it either way, but you absolutely can't have him or her I'm two boys, male examples here, but it can be obviously female, male. I mean, it can be Wall-E, it can be a robot if that's who you're writing about, but they have to stop. They can't just pivot and move again, because that's not what humans do when we receive horribly counter information that challenges us. At best, it's going to make us sit down. And more typically, it's going to make us lash out. It's going to make us angry and attack whoever or whatever gave us that information, because it's terrifying.
Well, thinking of that lashing out and pulling apart and all that, I was just thinking another decent example of a more secular crisis of faith would be the Marvel movie Civil War.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, that entire movie is, formerly united comrades in this common belief just utterly falling to pieces and going different directions over the same stimulus. The same crisis of faith drives them in wildly different ways.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that, like, allow your character to faint. That's just kind of what came to my head. It could be physically fainting. It could be, a fainting of heart. Just allow them to be shocked and to, really have a visceral kind of reaction. At least sometime in some stories that's very effective, where it's like, whoa, because they aren't going to start off trying to push against that, like again with life, the universe, and everything. You might be.
Uh-oh.
I hate it. Always happens at our important part.
Yes.
Yes.
Universe, like,
Sarah, the gods of the universe are trying to silence
to
you.
just
Right when
and
you're
really
revealing the
experience that
secrets.
deep and have some.
Okay. Well, I mean, that does bring up a point. In a faith crisis, an individual faith crisis, I don't really know of any example where people do turn on a dime. In fact, most of their faith that they have crisis with, they cling to even to the end. There's only certain aspects of their cosmovision that they will change. Can any of you address that? How's that? What's that look like in the narrative when you are grasping to the bitter end to keep as much as you can keep and only give up as little as you can give up?
That's franchise potential.
Yeah.
It is. You mentioned, Ben mentioned Mistborn, and I mean, Mistborn is a good example because the main character, I suck at names. I'm sorry. I could have read a book right before we showed up and not remember who's in it. I have trouble with my kids' names at times.
Did just publish another one though.
Yeah, well, there you go.
3,864.
But the thief girl in Mistborn, who's kind of the girl who's the hero's journey, and she's gaining power and growing, and you follow this sort of epic quest to the end, and at the very end, they achieve their objective, and the person they're trying to displace goes, "But what you don't know is you're fighting the wrong faith battle, and there's an even badder thing behind me." And so this poor girl who's been struggling with a world shift, and she finally goes, "Okay, I'm in. Let's fix it." And they fix it, and the person's like, "Yeah, there is a leaky faucet, and I am definitely a leaky part, but Niagara Falls is happening over here." And so, again, it's this broadening, it's this continuous widening of not their viewpoint, but their vision, where they see more and more, and every new bit of information about this universe challenges them in a new way, which is important for story longevity. So if you want to write a single story, boom, you fix it at the end. But if you want to broaden it out and make more stories, like if you have a series or an ongoing sort of a thing, a serialized thing, then at the end of every little part, the narrator basically says, "Good, I'm glad you've come to terms with this little bit of a faith issue, if you will. But it's the wrong thing because there's a bigger thing now." And the character at the end has to go, "Oh crap," and have that stall. And that, of course, is the lead time until the author can pump out the next book or whatever. But basically, they're inspiring the reader to sit there for 6 months or 2 years or a decade going, I'm having the same faith crisis right now. Can you please resolve this because it's killing me?
And
And I just
I'll
wanted
go.
to add
Oh.
something to this thread. So just because it's Charles Darwin's birthday today, I actually wanted to bring him up just as someone from history who lost his faith. And he's a really interesting person to me because he had good morals. He's a good, strong family person. So, first of all, don't get atheism mixed up with being amoral. But he didn't start off. It wasn't discovering evolution that made him become an atheist. In fact, a lot of what he was thinking about with evolution came from prior family influence, and other scientists already had some ideas that led him to make connections. So that was just kind of it was different, and he was very much actually concerned about, I'm bringing up some ideas that are challenging some sort of ancient Greek philosophies about how life on Earth formed and is connected to each other, and things like that that are part of modern Christianity. So that's a challenge, but I don't want people to feel like I'm attacking faith, that I'm attacking their faith. That's not how I feel. And really what happened with him losing his faith, it wasn't about science. In the end, it was he had a daughter who got very sick with a serious disease that was very painful for her. So she was going through this very long, slow, painful death. And he, in observing this and being helpless to be able to do anything to ease his daughter's pain and save her, felt like, if there's a merciful God, how can he let this happen to an innocent little girl, to my daughter? And so that was a turning point for him in particular, with his choosing to not believe in God anymore. He allowed the rest of his family actually maintain their faith. So a lot of his descendants today are Christian. It's very interesting. So that was a personal turning point for him that made it difficult for him to continue believing.
No matter how secular / religious a person is, faith crisis can always come just from the natural suffering, unresolvable suffering that life gives people. Ben, you were about to say something.
I was just going to add on to what Michaelbrent was saying. You were saying, it's a good way to extend your story. It's also realistic. Once somebody has taken the time, because it does take a minute to adjust to it, but taken the time to a new bit of information, all of a sudden there's a whole lot more out there. I can't tell you how many people I've seen go through a faith crisis, and suddenly there's change after change after change, and people outside aren't seeing it as much, but it's a whole series of faith crises that just keep coming, because it's once one part of your worldview has changed, what else is out there?
That's always what I feel like when I'm watching a monster movie. They kill the vampire, and I always think I would still never sleep again, because there's vampires. What else is there? I've just eliminated one of the key rules of my existence, which is no real monsters, but there are. So what's coming next? The Mummy, Frankenstein, the Xenomorph? Like, there's an infinitude of threats now. And I think the best stories, we don't want to operate with the character as a line from A to B, but a circle where the outer rim touches what they don't know. And so as they grow, so also the magnitude of the things they don't understand will grow. And it provides at every point of that circle a new story possibility for people like all of us who are willing to take a pretend person and hurt them in every possible way.
Wrong room. This is the wrong room.
5-minute warning. Do we have any Q&A? Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're ready to take Q&A. Do we have only 5 minutes left? Because I need to leave some time for everyone to introduce their work, actual novels.
Yes. So how about one question?
Okay.
When writing about a character who leaves a religion, how might you help readers who don't share that faith to understand why leaving the religion is a difficult decision?
That's the story. I mean, we're hurting people in our stories. That's the point, is you twist them to see how far they'll break. And sometimes you break them. And sometimes the point is showing how they break. And sometimes the point is sort of a narrative grace, like they can rise above that. But all of it boils down to, did you give them a past and explain them enough through action to your reader that when this new information comes, even if the reader doesn't agree with it, they have enough empathy, enough understanding that they go, I see the pain in this. You know, I don't have to have a broken arm to cry when my kid has a broken arm. And that's because I understand where they are. Even though I'm not 8 years old, I'm 45. I can still put myself there because I understand them enough. I've seen their birth and I've seen their growth. And I think as authors, we need to do that.
Having some order can also be more appealing, for example, than facing the unknown and saying, okay, well, this is what I know. Are there parts of this that are still valuable? So this kind of goes a little bit with that, resisting and how much can I hang on to and how much is actually valuable as you're pivoting. But for a character like they don't know anything else, and so it's very daunting to face that unknown, and then it's very appealing to say, well, I'm just going to stay here even though it doesn't feel correct. So that can be part of the challenge as well.
I would say focus on the little things, like very quick basic examples. If you have a character who's religious and part of that religion is a certain ceremony, every time they enter or leave their home, and if they lose their religion, you can have them, just do it on reflex and stop and, feel the pain of that's no longer a comfort to them.
All right. Moderator, how much time do we got left? I'm the moderator. Tech guy, how much time do we got left? All right, let's quickly. Ben, what's your newest book?
No book, but you can. My website's under construction right now, but it will soon be up. BenjaminPistorius.com, and you'll be able to see where I'm telling there.
Awesome.
So hopefully we'll have festivals again.
You can look up johnlundwall.com or type my name into YouTube. Michael Brent. At the end of this, you've got your 6,000th book published. What's your latest one?
Oh my gosh, what is the latest one? It's Stranger Danger. If you want a free book, just text books to 66866. Super easy. And I have a actually pretty expensive writing course that I always put on sale for a huge discount for LTUE, because this is my favorite writing convention in the world. Like, for real, this is the one. So it's 90% off through Sunday. So, go to here and put in the code LTUE 2021.
That's awesome. He's got the tagline on the bottom of his screen. Got to figure out how to do that. Sarah.
All right. So I am working on a couple of stories that I'm hoping to self-publish sometime soon. But my latest stories that could use a little bit of love, I've self-published my short story Driveless that first came out in Leading Edge magazine, and a story called Per Adventure. I'm also giving away some free vouchers for those. If you go over to my YouTube channel, which is Slitha Scriptura, or you can search for slithersofthought.com to find my blog. You can find some more information about how you can win some vouchers for some free stories from me.
Slithers.com?
Slithers of Thought.
Slivers of
Slithers
Thought.
of Thought. Or you can do SarahESeeley.com. That'll do it too.
Okay. Jared.
All right, so I'll be quick. My latest, Keepers of the Wind, which is, as I said, Sailor Moon crossed with Dutch mythology. It's out a couple months ago. Book 3 of my main blue-collar sci-fi series about a girl escaping basically space North Korea and becoming a freighter mechanic. Will be out later this year. First 2 books are out. And, you know, if you like steampunk stuff, I got a couple there. It's Penny Dreadful and the Clockwork Copper. Basically,
Well, that's a
steampunk
cool name.
Yeah, it's basically steampunk Batman versus a spy robot.
That's cool.
Nice.
I mean,
That's really cool.
Well, awesome. Thank you all for being in the panel and for all your wonderful contributions. And I learned a lot. I learned that somewhere there's an alien mouse drinking chamomile, thinking about adultery, hating robots. That's what I got.